Thank you for being here. Welcome. This will be a presentation from DSS on the updates for HR 1. Please advance the slide. We have a robust agenda for today. We're going to start off with our general updates, SNAP impact, Medicaid impact, data opportunities, and outreach initiatives. We do have wonderful subject matter experts with us today. We have DC Hadler, Deputy Commissioner from DSS, and Dan Giacomi, also from DSS, that will be presenting to you today. Once again, thank you so very much for coming, and we do hope that you get some valuable information. We're going to start this presentation off with Dan.
So welcome, thank you for taking your time to sit with us today and learn a little bit about HR 1, also known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act that was passed by Congress in July of 2025. As you may have heard in the news or seen elsewhere, it has significant impact for those individuals in the state of Connecticut and nationwide that are receiving benefits, namely SNAP benefits, Medicaid benefits here. So what we're going to talk about today is some of those impacts, some of the changes, some of the things that individuals can do, and how the agency itself is responding to this time and the changes that are occurring. So the first thing we're going to talk about today is the SNAP work requirement changes. In the SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, there have been work requirements since at least 1996. Throughout the period of time since then, there have been changes to it, there have been restrictions, there have been expansions. But what we're finding ourselves today is one of the largest expansions of the work requirements as we know them. The work rules are that individuals age 18 through 64 must work at least 80 hours per month or qualify for an exemption. If they're not working at least 80 hours per month, they can do a combination of work, volunteering, or job training. They could be in school at least half time, or they could be earning at least $217.50 a week. There are other exemptions that they may qualify for. Previously, those exemptions were adults with a child under the age of 18 in the home, but what you'll see on the screen as a result of HR 1 is a reduction in that age down to children under the age of 14. What that means now is that individuals that have a household with a child age 14 through 18 who were previously exempt from the work rules now must provide to us that they are compliant with the work rules or qualify for an exemption. Otherwise, they will no longer be eligible to receive SNAP benefits. That does not mean that the whole household will become ineligible. It just means that the individual that was subject to the work rules will no longer qualify, and the household may see a reduction in the amount of benefits that they're receiving. Also, as a result of HR 1, we had exemptions for other categories of individuals, such as veterans, regardless of discharge status, individuals that are experiencing homelessness, or those individuals under the age of 24, but who are in foster care at age 18. Who are no longer exempt from the work rules and now must provide to us that they're working at least 80 hours a month or have a combination, as I noted earlier. Similarly, we had something in our state and many states nationwide had, which was a geographic waiver that allowed us to look at state and national unemployment rates to determine if an area or a town or city within the state has a lack of sufficient jobs, either because lack of transportation or lack of industry. As a result of HR 1, those geographic waivers have been limited to towns or areas with an unemployment rate greater than 10%. In our state, there are no towns or cities that qualify for that exemption. That is the largest number of individuals that we see that are now subject to the work rules, that are no longer exempt, that are at risk of losing benefits. These work rules were implemented late last year, around December of 2025, and we have already seen a significant decrease in the number of individuals receiving SNAP benefits directly related to these changes. On this screen here, what you're going to see is heat maps of those populations of impact. You'll note on the left side of the screen that those are the populations in which the largest number of individuals have been reduced because of the fact that they're either not meeting the work requirements or do not have an identified exemption with DSS. It does not mean always that these individuals do not have an exemption. It just means that they have not been able to provide proof of that to the agency in order for us to ensure that they continue receiving those SNAP benefits. On the right side of the screen, what you'll see is a similar graph, or heat map, if you will, of those areas, but in relation to the actual population of individuals residing in those areas. What you'll note is that the center of the state here, where we have many of our most urban towns or cities, are the most affected. But you'll also note that on the eastern border of the state, there are large pockets of areas that have significant losses as a result of HR 1 and the work rules that came with it. Due to the timing of the data extract, as you'll see on the screen, these figures demonstrate members shifting from exemption to time-limited benefits, not necessarily the closures themselves. Because as I noted, you still are able to receive SNAP benefits for a short period of time. You're able to receive them for 3 months out of what we consider a 36-month period, or generally speaking, around 3 years. So some of the individuals on this map are still within their 3-month time period. However, if at the end of those 3 months they have not provided information to us to show that they're meeting the work rules or qualify for an exemption, they unfortunately will be closed and no longer eligible to receive SNAP benefits. On this screen here, you'll see another example of the losses and the population and beneficiary shifts that we have seen as a result of HR 1. As I noted, the work requirement exemptions themselves were primarily removed around December of 2025 and April of 2026. The reason for those two dates is in December of 2025, we noted a number of individuals that had already previously received 3 months worth of SNAP benefits. However, they were living in an exempt town, so they qualified. As I said before, that exempt town was our largest exemption. So when that removed, we saw our largest population of individuals be closed out of benefits. The second date, that April 2026, was our first cohort or first group of individuals that ended up closing out of benefits after receiving an additional 3 months from when we re-implemented the work rules. Around 17,000 beneficiaries shifted to time-limited status after the December 2025 exemption changes. And as I noted, around 15,000 of them lost benefits by April 2026, while another 2,000 remained or retained benefits, remained eligible, retained benefits because they were able to provide that information that we spoke of earlier. 10,000 more have shifted to time-limited status in April, which means in 3 months after April, those individuals, again, unless they're able to provide information to us, will then close out of their benefits. And approximately 2,000 to 3,000 other time-limited beneficiaries lost benefits between January and April. Based on our historical trend, what that means is those individuals were part of our normal cohort or fluctuation of individuals that lose benefits, not necessarily directly related to HR 1, but could be because they are over income or some other factor of ineligibility was obtained. But what you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen there is a pretty significant decrease of around 39,000 individuals between October 2025 and April 2026 that lost out on SNAP and are no longer receiving the state. This is a nationwide trend that we're seeing of thousands, if not millions, of individuals nationwide losing SNAP benefits as a result of HR 1 and the changes that came about. With that, I'm going to turn it over to DC Hadler, who's going to talk to us today about some of the Medicaid impacts of HR 1.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you guys for hearing that part about the first half of HR 1, which is impacting the SNAP population. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Medicaid side of things, which are in progress and will really start to be felt around the state in the coming months, starting in October, and really some very significant changes to folks who've been receiving Medicaid benefits, in particular in our Husky D program, which will really kick in January of 2027. So for a little bit of background, just so folks are reminded, Medicaid in Connecticut is known as Husky, and in particular, we're talking about the Husky D population. This is the low-income adults between the ages of 18 to 64, also known as Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act expansion population. This is where the majority of the changes for HR 1 Medicaid are taking place. So for a little bit of background, you may not know, unlike SNAP, there has never been a work requirement rule in Medicaid. It has never been a requirement to be able to access healthcare coverage, have to be able to demonstrate either compliance or an exemption from a work requirement. This is changing. Starting in January, Husky D enrollees, which is approximately 316,000 people at the time that we did this initial data analysis, will need to either meet the work requirements or community engagement, as it's also known, in order to maintain their benefits. How do you do that? Very much like SNAP, you have to be able to demonstrate that you are either working or engaging in a qualifying activity for about 80 hours a month. Alternatively, there is a dollar threshold that you can identify for Medicaid to be able to maintain your benefits, and that's $580 a month. And that is, you might notice that that's not quite how the minimum wage might work here in Connecticut, but that's based on the federal minimum wage. So the math there is $580 a month because that's the federal minimum wage times 80 hours. Alternatively, if you don't have that income, there's a number of other ways that you might be able to demonstrate that you're compliant with the work rules. And those include participating in community service or a qualified work or training program, being enrolled at least half time in an educational program, or any combination of work, volunteering, education, or training that adds up to 80 hours a month. There are also exemptions in Medicaid. Like Dan referenced in SNAP, there are some populations who will not need to meet work requirements based on their current circumstances or conditions. For example, veterans with disability rated as total. For those in the veterans community, some of these terms may resonate more than everyone else, but this is a 100% Schedule R rating, or a total disability based on individual unemployability, or TDIU. There are a number of other categories up here. Medically frail, which is a particularly important category that I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about on subsequent slides, because a very significant population within the Husky D coverage is potentially medically frail, depending on how it is defined. Other exemptions, and these again are folks that do not need to take any other action in order to be able to maintain their Husky D coverage. Folks who are participating in an approved drug or alcohol treatment and rehabilitation program. If you're already meeting the work requirements in SNAP or our Temporary Family Assistance or TFA program, which is a cash assistance that is administered here at DSS. If you're the caregiver of a child under the age of 14, or someone who needs help with daily activities, such as a disabled person or older adult. If you've recently been released from incarceration in the last 90 days, if you're a Native American or Alaskan Native, if you're a foster or former foster youth up to the age of 26, or there are certain categories known as short-term hardship waivers, for example, individuals who are receiving medical care out of state. These populations are exempt from the work rules, but they may still need to demonstrate that they fall into one of these categories. So we'll talk a little bit about how that might work. And just note that we are still operationalizing a lot of these changes. We're evaluating where we can support people and how the pathway will work for people to be able to show documentation and take other steps that might allow them to say, for example, that they're caring for an adult with a disability and that is a full-time situation that they can't actually work during that time period. So I'm going to give a little bit of a background on medical frailty and some of the other categories. As you can see from the screen here, when we did our initial analysis this past May on a comprehensive basis of trying to assess who might be medically frail or meet other exemptions or compliance categories based on data that DSS already has, you can see some very big numbers pop up. So we estimate that about 126,000 people are already known to DSS to have a condition that might meet medical frailty. And for a very technical definition of medical frailty, you can see the left-hand box on the left over there, which includes substance use disorder, disabling mental disorder, physical, intellectual, or developmental disability that significantly impairs one or more activities of daily living, a serious or complex medical condition, or if you're blind or disabled. So again, we have information at DSS based on the services that we've been able to provide to people over time that indicates they may have a condition that meets the medically frail definition. You'll also see a number of other categories in the center chart and about how many people we've been able to identify meet each condition. We estimate that about 30% of the population have wage records that we already know about that demonstrate that they're compliant with work requirements. About 14% of people are SNAP beneficiaries, meeting the SNAP work requirements. 12% have another eligibility factor. 8% are on SSI, and approximately 2% are students. Now, these are not necessarily the numbers for the population, what they actually are. It's just what we know right now at DSS. And the reason this is very important is because if we have the data to determine someone eligible, then we can unilaterally determine someone can have ongoing coverage without people needing to take additional action. That's known as an ex parte review. Basically, we are taking the information that we know and enabling people to maintain coverage because we have proof that they continue to be eligible. I will also note that you'll see that these categories do not add up to the 206,000 you see near the top of that, and that's because these categories are not mutually exclusive. Somebody could, for example, have wage records that meet the requirements and also be a SNAP beneficiary. Taking all those factors into consideration, we did want to highlight that as of May, we were estimating approximately 110,000 people, or 35% of the population, are categorized as at risk. And the reason they're at risk is because we don't have the information right now to know if they are compliant or exempt. It does not mean that they're not compliant or exempt. It's just that we don't know that yet. So we've furthered our analysis, and we've been digging very deeply here at DSS into what might meet a medical frailty definition. We conducted a number of additional detailed reviews. We compared to lists and definitions that were being provided by other states, including Michigan, Nebraska, a group of Western states, Pennsylvania, and some further analysis was done by Harvard School of Public Health. We took all of those various analyses that are based on claims and diagnosis information. So what kind of information you are diagnosed by your provider and how they submit claims to Medicaid to get paid gives us a lot of information about what kind of a condition you might have and enables us to create a definition of medical frailty. We currently have a list of 6,215 diagnosis codes that form the basis of our definition. And using that definition of saying within the last 12 months, you've been diagnosed or have a claim that meets one of those conditions, we have 131,000 people, or 41% of the entire population, that appears to meet the medical frailty definition. So you saw before that I had layered all of the different ways somebody might be falling into one of the categories for medical, for compliance or an exemption. This is a little bit of a different look. And we wanted to put this here because there's some big things going on with medical frailty definition. I'm going to talk about that on the next couple of slides. But we wanted to be able to identify who might meet some other category before we did a medical frailty evaluation. And as you can see here, this is a deduplicated or mutually exclusive list of folks. We said, first, let's see how many people meet the wage records that we have. Then we said how many might meet a student definition, how many might be a SNAP beneficiary qualifying already, et cetera, until you get to the bottom and you see, okay, medical frailty is still a very important component of how we are able to determine someone exempt or compliant from the work requirements. But now we're down to about 57,000 people who are exclusively reliant on a medical frailty definition to potentially be exempt from the work requirements. So why am I spending so much time talking about medical frailty? Because it's a moving target. The federal government, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, or CMS, recently issued an interim final rule, or an IFR, that was implementing and interpreting the community engagement requirement. This was 387 pages of detail telling states how to operationalize the changes and what kind of things they might have to do. It has a 60-day comment period that is actively running as the time that we're meeting here, but is ending soon. The IFR is scheduled to go into effect at the end of the month on July 31st, 2026. We have been continuing to receive and have been told we will continue to receive guidance from CMS, but the changes are very significant and they're very challenging for us to administer. So I just want to be very candid about that. This is not an easy thing from an administrative perspective to try and build a system with rules that are constantly changing. So what else was in that IFR, the 387 pages? This was a takeaway that was put together by a wonderful national organization to help make sense of that 387-page rule. They note, of course, that there's a lot of important policy and operational implications for how you define someone as being subject to work rules or exempt from them. And the second one there is a very important one. They narrowed the medical frailty exclusion by saying not only do you need to have a diagnosis that meets a medical frailty, but you have to be able to show that it significantly impairs your ability to work or meet the community engagement requirements. This is something that is very much new, not just a claims basis or diagnosis based definition, but you actually have to tie that back to your ability to work or participate in community engagement requirements. A few of the other big changes, they required states to choose all of the short-term exceptions if they wanted to offer any. They did also, through that rule, allow states to accept self-attestation for a number of elements of eligibility. This means that in certain circumstances, if you can't provide documentation to show that you meet an exemption or compliant, you might be able to just tell us verbally that, no, I can't work because I am caring for my parent who's at home and disabled. That will only work, however, for 1 year. So we will continue to provide updates about the latest status of how those pieces of verification might change in the coming months and years. They also noted that there is a component in the HR1 rule that would allow states who are trying really hard and making a good faith effort to make these changes, but just won't be able to do it in time for starting January 1st, 2027, to potentially get a good faith waiver. CMS said, yeah, maybe, only 2 states. So the odds of being able to rely on a good faith effort and defer the start date of this is very slim. So we continue to proceed rapidly, anticipating that we will have to implement January 1st, 2027 with whatever structure and components we've been able to build by that time. So here's a specific wording from the IFR in particular. I think it is a useful one when you're talking about what does it mean to have this significant impairment language. It is really a substantial additional layer to a determination. It's not something that is always in your medical records. It is not something that is obvious from your treatment or condition in all circumstances. And in fact, the federal guidance has indicated, for example, that you might have cancer, but that doesn't mean that you cannot work. You'll have to demonstrate that your treatment or your condition is leaving you in a place where you're not able to meet the work requirements in order to then be able to fall under the medical frailty exemption. States are required to use claims data from the past 12 months to determine eligibility, which is actually a good thing because that's something that DSS and Connecticut and many other states were already doing. That's that 6,200 codes that I was talking about. We were looking at how to leverage those to support people through this eligibility process, and now we will be able to continue doing so. I will note again that self-attestation is going to be allowed in 2027 up to a certain extent for certain variables of eligibility, but that we'll have to validate and document medical frailty beginning no later than January 2028. So this definition is far more restrictive than was originally considered. The significant impairment language was very surprising to states. And I will note that Connecticut is part of a multi-state coalition that has sued CMS to argue that that is an expansion beyond CMS's authority to add that secondary level. As you can see from the numbers involved with medical frailty, that's a very important potential avenue for us to be able to support folks in Connecticut if the courts determined that CMS has overstepped their authority in adding the significant impairment language. It allows us to fall back to that medical frailty definition that we started with, which is all based on codes, where we had 131,000 people that we thought we would be able to determine exempt from the work requirements all along. So that's a lot of information about the background on medical frailty and the work requirements exemptions, but there's other things going on too. We're trying to figure out how to maximize this ex parte process to make things as simple as possible for people. We know that data is tucked into all sorts of different places and corners around the state. And with all the new requirements around the policies that you just heard about, we're trying to figure out how to make it easier for state residents to be able to keep their coverage without having to do much about repeating information that they might have already provided to another agency or that another agency might have on hand. So we are partnering with many of the state agencies around the state who may have information to help support an eligibility determination for Medicaid and for SNAP. For example, our Department of Labor, we know that they administer training programs. So we'd like to get information from them to see if we can identify a person who's participating, and therefore a person who's participating wouldn't have to tell us all over again that that's what they're doing and why they should be determined compliant or exempt. We have other educational institutes that we expect have potential information around half-time or full-time educational status. We know that our partners at DCF, at Department of Children and Families, have information about former foster youths. The Department of Correction have information about people who've been recently released from incarceration, and et cetera. So what we're doing here, we're identifying all the places we think there's information, and we're conducting a data match against everybody who's enrolled in Husky D to say how many people are in both Husky Medicaid and also receiving services or getting an educational degree with one of our other state partners or organizations that we can potentially connect with. We're going to pull together all this data to help identify where the most important information is, to decide where we're going to spend information time in trying to link data up to the new system we're building to support the work requirements. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Dan to talk a little bit about our outreach and communication efforts and other things that we're trying to do to help people make awareness and learn about all of these changes.
So you probably title this slide differently and say, how can I help, right? One of the things that has come about as a result of HR1 is that we've had individuals in the community and throughout the state, as well as organizations, reach out to us and say, how can I help? How can I support you? How can I support our mutual clients? So in the next couple of slides, we're going to talk about some tangible steps that you can take to help support us and those that we serve. The first is become familiar. Throughout this presentation, you've heard a lot of information. It's very dense. There's a lot of changes, very nuanced, somewhat complicated. What we've done is created an HR1 toolkit where you can go and read through at your pace, frequently asked questions, a pre-screener or a couple of pre-screeners in actuality that I'll go into in a bit, and a bunch of other information that we have, not only about the work rule changes in HR1, but also other changes that resulted from this bill passing. One change that we didn't mention here today, but that you'll see on the screen, is there's changes to non-citizen eligibility for individuals receiving SNAP and Medicaid. If you want to learn more about that, please visit our HR1 toolkit. Especially note that there is clear, concise language that walks you through the changes and outlines the steps someone will need to take to maintain their coverage. Where they can go to drop off information, where they can go to see if they're eligible for an exemption, or what the specific work rules are for both SNAP and Medicaid. It's something that is kind of a living document, living site. We will continue to update it continuously as we make operational changes to implement the steps needed to be in compliance with HR1. As DC Hather mentioned on the Medicaid changes, we're still going through the definition of medical frailty. We're working with other organizations to see data that may be available. And all of this information and more will be contained on that HR1 Toolkit website. As you'll see on the screen as well, there are work requirements pre-screeners. The first that you can see by scanning this QR code or going to the address on the screen is regarding the Medicaid work requirements. The first step it asks is put in your age. As we noted, these HR1 Husky D changes are for individuals age 19 through 64. So if you're outside of that age range, this does not apply to you. But once you do that, it'll ask you other questions pertaining to your work rules, exemptions, inability to work because you're taking care of an individual that can't care for themselves, things of that nature that'll allow you to see whether or not you are exempt from the work rules, or if you're not exempt, what steps you need to take to let us know that you are compliant with it. Similarly, we have a SNAP work rules one. Same question to start off with. As we noted, the SNAP work rules, though the younger age limit is 18 as opposed to 19, both have a upper bound age limit of 64 through age 64. Go to the URL on the screen or use the QR code to get there as well to see whether or not you have to be compliant with the work rules or if you meet an exemption. If you do meet an exemption, how to let us know you meet an exemption. All of these are contained within these pre-screeners. And then finally, how do you help your fellow residents? First thing we want to make sure you're able to do is have them update us if their information has changed. If they move, we need to know where they're living so that we can make sure to send the information to the correct address. If they have an exemption, we need to know that they have an exemption. If they're compliant, we need to know that as well. While we will do our best to use the information that we have available to us, as DC Hadler noted, there are individuals that are not going to be compliant or exempt based on the information we have, and we need them to provide that information to us. If you go to portal.ct.gov/updateusDSS, it will give you all of the ways in which you can provide information about changes to us and make sure to update us with your most current information. Similarly, I'll throw in another plug as well for the HR1 Toolkit. You'll see that as the first URL, as well as our 2 pre-screeners. Again, if you want to know, if you want to be able to help others help themselves, these are the places to go to ensure that those individuals that are eligible remain eligible, do not fall through the cracks due to an administrative error or simply by not knowing. With that, that's the end of our presentation. We're now going to open it up for any questions you may have.
What happens if I lose my job?
Thank you for that question. That's a very important question because we know this is something that happens to people all the time. You have a job, you don't have a job, you come on and off. The most important thing that you can do is let us know. Tell us when you lost your job as soon as it happens. You might be eligible for additional SNAP benefits temporarily. If you need to be able to get unemployment, that is a very valuable piece of information for us to know, because that's actually an exemption from the work requirements if you're actively receiving unemployment benefits. It also may not impact your Medicaid benefits right away. We look back over a period of time to see if you've been engaged in work activities or other qualifying activities before we make an eligibility determination. So my first advice would just be to let us know. We're also going to be able to offer potentially some places where you might be able to be connected to a volunteer opportunity or other employment opportunities to be able to get back into compliance and able to continue receiving SNAP or Medicaid benefits. Dan, did I miss anything?
You didn't miss, but what I would add to that, and I think you bring up a great point, is, as I noted at the end of the presentation, is we've had a number of organizations that have reached out to us asking us how they can help. One group that's reached out to us are our state's community action agencies. So we're actually partnering with our community action agencies to provide job training supports, linkages, and other referrals to agencies or areas throughout the state that may help you obtain a new job.
Can I regain my benefits later?
Yes, absolutely. If at any point that you've obtained new employment, or you are in other ways meeting the work requirements, or you obtained an exemption, or you've identified that you qualify for an exemption, you can reapply with us at any point and retain eligibility as well.
And I will just add that goes for both SNAP and Medicaid.
Are there any other questions?
Where do I report my hours?
You can report your hours in any number of places. For SNAP, you can report your hours through My DSS, Connect, online, in both of those online portals. You can also come into a DSS office, or you could submit information through the mail. Those are all different ways that you can communicate that information and are all perfectly acceptable. For Medicaid, we're going to be leveraging our current partnership with Access Health Connecticut. You should report all of your information relevant to work requirements through that standard channel that you currently use for reporting income and otherwise being able to renew your eligibility for Husky D.
Those addresses for the online portals are connect.ct.gov, mydss.ct.gov, and accesshealthct.com.
Where can I go for help understanding these changes?
The first place we would tell you to go is to our HR1 toolkit. That has comprehensive information, FAQs, pre-screeners, and a host of information that will help you understand the work rules, the exemptions, and where you can go to make sure you are compliant with each of them.
We've also partnered with our community action agencies around the state to help understand and navigate both the SNAP work requirement changes and the Medicaid work requirement changes. Once the Medicaid work requirements go into place, you'll also be able to contact us through our normal channels at Access Health Connecticut.
I have a two-part question. Can I volunteer by helping my neighbor around their house? And what documents do I need to prove my work or volunteer hours?
Unfortunately, doing things like helping a neighbor around the house do not qualify as volunteering. If you want to meet your volunteer work hours, it needs to be at a governmental or nonprofit organization where someone is overseeing the work you are doing and is able to attest to the fact that you volunteered and how often throughout the month you were volunteering.
In addition to that information, what we really need is a document that shows the name of the organization, a contact person who was responsible for overseeing the volunteer work, and the number of hours that were worked during the time period. That can come on letterhead or in another format that comes from the volunteer organization itself.
Similarly, to prove your work hours, you could provide any documentation. It could be wage stubs, as long as it's covering a month period. It could be a letter from the place that you're employed, identifying the number of hours you work and the schedule that you have.
And if you self-employ, you may need to fill out some additional forms to identify what kind of information we will need to make an eligibility determination. Please feel free to contact DSS for SNAP or Access Health for Medicaid questions around self-employment.
So say I work at an employer and I'm making $580 a month, but I can't get 80 hours a month. Do I still qualify?
So in the SNAP program, the rule is that you must be working at least 80 hours a month or making at least $217.50 a week in pay, regardless of what your hours are.
Medicaid is a little bit different. You can either show that you are earning $580 a month, or you have to demonstrate at least 80 hours of a combination potentially of work requirements or community engagement. You can, for example, have 20 hours of volunteering, 60 hours of employment, and meet the 80 hours that way.
You mentioned there were some other exemptions for the SNAP program. Are you able to provide some examples?
Certainly, I can provide some examples to you. Individuals receiving Social Security or Veterans Disability benefits, individuals that are taking care of elderly adults or disabled children, or any individual with a disability that needs help taking care of themselves, certain Native American or Alaskan Native populations, and a number of other examples, all of which can be found on our website and our HR1 toolkit.